Well, it certainly does. Beijing goes through the very formulaic responses whenever they're accused of hacking. The one thing, though, that is important is that China's right now using criminal hackers, and those criminal hackers are engaged in ransomware and all sorts of associated activity, and they're working hand in hand with the Ministry of State Security. So this is not just some sort of off-the-side gang. This is really central to Beijing's efforts. You got to remember that China runs the Great Firewall, the most sophisticated set of internet controls in the world. So they know exactly what's happening. And when these large gangs engaged in ransomware, Beijing is behind it.
Absolutely. I mean, to that point specifically, the president, for the second time in 3 weeks yesterday, said that it's not really China that's behind it. It's people acting from within China. But as you just pointed out, it is impossible for any organization to operate at this scale within China and China not know who they are or have the capabilities of preventing it. It's impossible for a gang of hackers within Russia to operate at the scale that the hacks that we've seen are occurring without it having been sanctioned by the Kremlin. Why is it that any person with half a brain can see this, and the person who is in the Oval Office with the greatest intelligence on the planet seemingly wants to put his head in the sand and pretend that there's nothing happening?
Yeah, the guy who sits at the Oval Office is also charged that China runs a near total surveillance state. So whether we're talking about criminal ransomware or we're talking about the fentanyl gangs or the counterfeiting of American currency, which is also an act of war, this is sponsored by the Communist Party, and the Communist Party is responsible for it. And, Joe, these guys in Beijing, they actually tell us, look, they take credit for everything that goes on in China. So they should be held responsible for all of these activities, which are malicious, and they're a direct attack on the American Republic.
Absolutely. Before I lose you here, I want to talk about something that no one seems to be talking about enough. These brand spanking new nuclear silos sitting in the Chinese desert, dug by this Chinese government, all while we hear them now, the chatter starting to pick up as we see what's happening in Cuba, with China basically saying hands off when it comes to the Cuban communist regime. In many ways, to me, it's all the echoes of the 1960s all over again. How do we get serious about this emerging threat? Because to me, this is the largest nuclear buildup we have seen since perhaps the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Well, certainly it is, Joe. It's the biggest buildup. That's 119 silos in the Gansu Desert. When you add the 26 others, that's 145 installations for the DF-41, which has a range to hit the U.S. and has each DF-41 has 10 warheads. So, yeah, this is a Cuban Missile Crisis number 2. And I think the Chinese are much more determined than Khrushchev ever was. So, we've got to be really concerned that Beijing is not going to act responsibly here. Because, as you say, they blame us for everything going on in Cuba. And they've also got a listening post in Lourdes, which is just west of Havana. They're deeply involved in supporting the Cuban regime. Along with Venezuela, the two of them actually keep that regime in business.